depth. So I don't think depth is old school or new school.
Super important.
It's, yeah, depth dictates our results. And depth is directly tied to pigment performance, whether your pigment is going to perform at its very best or at its very worst, or somewhere in between. Depth. But the new generation of artists are being taught to work very shallow. And I don't know why. You know, I would love to know like why. I can guess why. Maybe they're afraid of going too deep and getting gray and blue muddy results.
Or do they think it will damage the skin?
Or maybe I'm wondering if they think it will damage the skin. And it is better to go more shallow when you're learning. You know, I say that all the time. But I think it's important if you are a newbie and you're going too shallow to slowly start.
Like learning to swim.
Like learning to swim, right? You're not going to dive into the deep end. Yeah. You know, like my apprentices here, I tell them all the time, I'd rather it all fall out or fade out in 6 months, you know, than you go too deep. I'd rather you be too shallow than too deep, you know, way. Because, you know, no harm, no foul if you go too shallow, but your pigment's just not going to perform as well. You know, so, you know, if you go too deep, pigment is not going to heal that beautiful tone that it was manufactured to do.
Right.
It's going to heal gray, blue, muddy, because you've implanted it too deep, so it's sitting too close to the vascular system. There's too much epidermal skin covering it, and it just looks like crap, right? Gray, blue, gray. It can migrate.
Cause scar tissue.
Cause scar tissue and skin damage, which is the biggest thing. So you definitely don't want to go too deep. On the flip side, you go too shallow and either...
Orange.
Yeah, it can, right. If it stays in the skin, then it can end up aging, looking too warm in a few months or 6 months. It won't last as long as it should. It can all fall out during the healing process, and you end up with nothing but discolored skin from the trauma the needle caused. And when you go too shallow, a lot of times, you know, the artist will say, well, it turned orange. Well, it didn't turn orange. You know, this particular color doesn't turn orange. There's no orange. There's no orange in it. It doesn't turn orange. But because they implanted so shallow, that pigment didn't last. It was too close to the surface of the skin. It was only in the epidermal skin. It sloughed off, you know, because epidermal skin renews itself. And maybe in 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, the pigment all got sloughed off. And why it might look warm or discolored, it's not that the pigment turned. It's that that skin was wounded with a needle 6 months, 10 months, you know, back. And on that particular client, that discoloration, it didn't heal away.
Right.
And now there's no pigment covering it up.
Right.
Right? So now you're just seeing wounded skin.
So even though you go shallow, you can still have trauma.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
You can still have trauma.
Okay.
Oh, for sure. But, absolutely. Because you're breaking that top epidermal layer of skin, so you're causing trauma, you know. So, you know, so depth is not old school, new school. I think there's proper depth, and it's in that upper dermal layer. And I'm not saying you're wrong if you don't go down to that upper dermal layer and you like to tattoo more shallow. I don't think that's wrong per se. I would never tell anybody, well, that's wrong. You know, that's your technique of tattooing. That's where you like to place it. But what I do think is pigments don't perform at their best when they are implanted so shallow. They don't last as long as they should. and they don't perform at their best. And a couple of different pigment chemists have, we've had these conversations with chemists,
Right.
About that, with pigments. So yeah, so that's my 2 takes on old school versus new school. And I don't mind being an old school artist. I think maybe I'm a little old school with a new school edge. I think that's how I like to.
Yeah. I think that would be a really good description. Yeah.
Of me, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm fascinated with all the minute the single needle got popular, what'd I do? Whip one out and I tattooed a heart on you with a single needle.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right? Because I want to learn all the new school stuff. I want to stay relevant. I think it's important to stay relevant. And I just have that inner desire, craving, obsession, whatever you want to call it, to stay relevant. I don't discard any new style, technique, needle, nothing. I want to learn it, and I want to know all about it, and I want to try it. It might not be for me, come to find out. Sometimes it's not. And then other times it's like, oh my God, like I'm totally digging this.